There was once a man who entered your life like a silent mountain. He didn't speak much, didn't show emotions like your mother often did, but he was there, always there, like a figure both close and distant. At times he was irritable, hard to understand, cold. Sometimes he was simply silent, as if hiding something all his life. You called him father, and maybe even now as you've become an adult, you still don't truly know who he is. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent." Did your father live his life? Or was he merely dragging along an unformed dream, imprisoned by duty, roles, and expectations? Have you ever looked deep into that man's eyes, not seeking advice, not begging for approval, but simply to ask one honest question? Dad, who are you really? He might not know the answer himself, but within that unknowing, something was passed on to you. A part of his shadow, an invisible tumor of memory, now quietly lives inside you, like a spiritual inheritance without a name. In Carl Jung's depth psychology, the father isn't just a person in the outside world. He is an archetype. The father, in the collective unconscious, represents power, law, logic, order, and the formed ego. But within each individual, this image becomes distorted. It turns into a mask, a persona, that a man must wear throughout life to be the provider, the protector, the guide. And in that journey, many fathers lose themselves. They quietly kill the child within, the inner child who once dreamed, cried, wanted to play, wanted to be free. They repress it, lock it away, because men must not be weak. And when the child is starved long enough, it becomes the shadow, exploding outward through anger, coldness, workaholism, or unreachable distance. That's why, in many families, the father becomes like a stone wall, not because he lacks love, but because his love is trapped behind the armor of an identity hardened by fear and self-avoidance. Do you remember the times he got angry for no clear reason? Did you ever fear his stern look as if facing a judging God? That wasn't truly him. That was his shadow speaking in his place. And the tragedy is, the shadow is inherited. Jung didn't see the shadow as something evil to be avoided. On the contrary, he believed that only by facing the shadow, by looking deep into the buried parts of our psyche, do we truly grow. And to see the shadow, you must first face the man you call father. In analytical therapy, many people discover that their deepest wounds don't come from catastrophic events, but from unspoken absences, like a hug that never came, a gaze that never truly saw them. Many grow up feeling, "I'm not good enough. I must earn love. I have to be strong all the time," not realizing that these echoes come from their father, a man who had repressed himself, then passed that repression down as a form of teaching. I once witnessed a heart-wrenching image during a therapy session. A nearly 50-year-old man, tears silently streaming down his face, said, "I don't remember my father ever praising me, but I remember clearly the times he criticized me. I don't hate him. I just wish he had told me he was proud of me." That sentence wasn't just the voice of one man. It was the echo of millions of sons and daughters who grew up in the quiet shadow of the father figure. In today's world, as traditional male roles are being challenged, as old models collapse, the image of the father becomes even more disoriented. People may no longer need a protector in the muscular sense, but deep in their souls, everyone still yearns for a guiding presence, a mountain to lean on. What Carl Jung emphasized is this: maturity does not come from rejecting the image of the father, but from reconciling with him in the psyche. You cannot fix your father, but you can listen. Listen to what was never said, to the dreams he abandoned, to the nameless anger, to the tiny joys he gave up in order to be a man. And then something magical happens. You begin to understand yourself more clearly, and part of the shadow within you is set free. There's a paradox we rarely acknowledge. The more silent and stoic a man appears, the more deeply fragmented he may be inside. Society trains men to be strong, but in a twisted way. Strong means don't cry, don't complain, don't feel, don't ask questions. So inside many fathers, there is a vast emptiness, an unnamed void, misunderstood and forbidden to exist. Jung called this identification with the persona, the social mask. The father must become a performance. At home, he is the provider. At work, the ideal employee. In society, the responsible one. But was he ever allowed to simply be himself? As a child, you saw your father as a god. As an adult, you realize he was just a boy who grew up, with wounds unhealed, expectations unmet, and a soul no one ever asked about. And then you feel afraid, because if the mountain you once leaned on can also crumble, who will lead you? Many modern men live in that confusion. They grew up without a healthy emotional model from their father. They learned to be silent, to work, to force a smile, to endure. And then they pass that same pattern to their own children. A sad replica of the generation before. This is intergenerational trauma, something modern psychology increasingly recognizes. It's not just war or violence that causes trauma. The absence of emotional connection, the father's non-presence, the unspoken helplessness, these are all fragments that shatter a child's soul. And you know what? We carry those fragments throughout life. We seek lovers to heal us. We become fathers and repeat the very things we once hated. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The image of the father, if not faced in the psyche, will live within us as an invisible force. It shapes how we father, how we love, how we get angry, how we fall silent. There is a term in depth psychology, the negative father complex. It occurs when a child grows up under a father figure who is repressive, harsh, or absent. Under this influence, the child may become rebellious, self-destructive, or endlessly seek approval from substitute father figures, bosses, teachers, lovers, or even society itself. In dreams, the father rarely appears as a real person. He appears as a symbol, a stern man, a lion, a mountain, a locked house. The unconscious speaks in symbols, not words, and in symbolic psychology, the father represents the principle of logos, rationality, structure, and boundaries. But when that image becomes distorted, when logos is repressed, twisted by unacknowledged pain, it turns into shadow. The inner father becomes the dark father, no longer a guide but a dominator, no longer a teacher but a punisher, no longer loving but making us feel always wrong, always lacking, always unworthy. And in the silence of the real father, this shadow grows inside the child. I once heard a therapeutic story. A man in his 40s, CEO of a major company, broke down in the quiet office of his analyst. "I never told my dad, 'I love you.' I thought it was weak. But now I realize what I called strength was actually fear of being hurt." He had lived his whole life trying to prove to a long-deceased father that he was good enough, and never once asked, "Is this the life I truly want?" Healing doesn't begin by blaming our father. It begins by seeing him as human, not as a symbol. A father was once a son too. He once dreamed, was wounded, and was told by his own parents, "Boys don't cry." True forgiveness doesn't come from morality. It comes from deep understanding. When you see that your father was trapped in a chain of inherited trauma, you no longer want to blame. You want to break the chain. You want to be the one who stops, the one who dares to look into the darkness without turning away. The first in your lineage to say, "I see you, Dad. I see the pain you never spoke, and I choose not to pass it on." In that moment, you begin to become a real father, not just for your children, but first for the child within you. There is a sadness few dare to name. It doesn't scream like grief. It doesn't cut like betrayal. It's simply absence, a quiet absence, stretching from childhood into adulthood. The absence of a knowing gaze, a forgiving hug, a warm voice saying, "I'm here," and you're enough just as you are. Father's Day is not just a time to buy a gift, send a message, or post an old photo. Father's Day, if we allow it, can be a door into forgotten memory, a place where the child in us still waits to be seen, acknowledged, held. And there, not only is our real father waiting for us, but so is the image of the sacred father, an archetype in the collective unconscious that Jung called the wise old man, a symbol of wisdom, guidance, and unconditional love. But to reach that place, we must walk through a forest, the dwelling of the shadow. Do you remember the fairy tales you heard as a child? Boys setting out on adventures, girls walking into deep woods, children facing monsters, witches, or wolves. These weren't just stories for fun. They were psychological maps, maps into the unconscious. And at the end of each journey, the hero doesn't just find treasure, they return transformed. The father they feared or lost is now reborn inside themselves. Perhaps Father's Day is an invitation to begin that journey. Not everyone still has a father to call. Not everyone has a father to love. But each of us carries an incomplete image of a father within. A part of us still seeks guidance, validation, protection. And unless we awaken, that dark part of the inner father will control our choices, actions, emotions, and fate. Some chase money because they saw their father lacking. Some suppress tears because they grew up with a silent dad. Some become addicts, abusers, or abandon their own children because within them lives a father never healed. But some turn back, face it, touch that pain, not to judge, but to hold it in the light of awareness. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Father's Day, seen through the eyes of depth psychology, is an opportunity to do just that. Not just to honor a person, but to confront the inner father image, to reconcile, to understand, to be free. And if you are a father, remember that your child doesn't need you to be perfect. They need you to be real. They don't need a man who is always strong. They need someone who can admit mistakes, listen, and say, "I'm sorry." And if you never had such a father, be that person for yourself, for your children, for the generations to come. Because the trauma cycle doesn't stop on its own. It stops when someone is brave enough to face it. When someone dares to love the unlovable part of themselves, the part their father never could. So today, you might try this. Sit still, do nothing. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and ask, "Dad, did it ever hurt?" Let that question touch the deepest part of you. No answer needed, only honesty. And one day, you will see. The father you've always been looking for is not far away. He lives within you, waiting for you to embrace him, not as a child, but as a healer. If this video touched something inside you, take a moment to write a letter. To your father or to yourself, one you've never dared to write before. And if you wish to continue the journey of self-discovery, of facing the shadow, and understanding the layers of your unconscious that shape your life, we are here with you. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video, where together we dive into the depths of the soul, not to become perfect, but to become whole.